My guest today is Dr. Marie Meaney, and she has a new book out called When Expecting Doesn't Happen, Turning Infertility into a Journey of Hope. Welcome to the show, Marie.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. Really looking forward to this.
It's great to have you, and I've been looking forward to talking to you on this topic because I know so many people that have been impacted by this particular topic. And if they haven't been impacted personally, they know somebody else that has.
Yeah.
So tell the listeners, why did you write the book, Marie?
Well, it's coming out of a personal experience, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
We were surprised when, babies didn't come along after our marriage. And I was kind of taken aback at just how tremendously painful this was. I wasn't expecting that. I'd seen other couples going through the same thing, and I realized that they were suffering tremendously, but this took me by surprise. And I was trying to do the right thing, as a good Catholic and trying to accept this with courage, and somehow got a lot of things wrong in the process. And I wish somebody had been there to tell me, it seems like it would have been easy to make some things a little bit less hard. And my husband and I accepted the teachings from the church from the beginning, and we're very grateful for them. But we just felt this is not helping us just to know how to deal with this day to day. How
Mm-hmm.
do you shoulder this tremendous suffering from one day to the next? And I was talking to a lot of other women who were going through the same thing, and I felt we had a lot in common. And so I wrote the first version of this book in darkness, not knowing whether we'd ever have children. That was six years into our marriage, and and then 3 years later, we did have a little girl, which was a tremendous blessing. And then 1.5 years later, we had a miscarriage to our great sadness, and then unfortunately no more children. And then I published this book in different languages because I come from various backgrounds. So I published it in German and then in French, and each time added something. And so I felt this was the time to come back to this topic. And so add everything that I've learned over the years and put it in there. Um, and so it's been a work in progress, a long work, and I really hope it's going to help couples and their families who are undergoing this.
Mm-hmm. So, Marie, who is the book geared for?
Um, so I wrote this book for couples who are undergoing fertility and who went through this or going through the same experience that I went through, simply to help them a little bit on this way, which can be so tremendously crushing. But I also wrote this for friends and family because they often feel very helpless and don't know how to deal with it, what to say, and end up doing and saying exactly the wrong thing. And as a couple undergoing this experience, it's when it's in so much pain that it's hard to explain to family and friends why this is so hard. And so I thought, well, to have one chapter in there that is easily readable for friends would just make it more practical, to sort of give it to family and say, just read that chapter, and then you know what I'm going through. And but this book is also for pastors, those who are trying to help, and of course
Mm-hmm.
anybody interested in the issue.
Sure. So tell me, Marie, is infertility, is it just a female issue?
Oh, no, not at all. Though it's often wrongly thought to be so, which is kind of
Mm-hmm.
frustrating for the woman in the couple. But it's basically, they say it's 1/3 is female, 1/3 is male causes, and the other third is both of them together or simply unknown, because there are still some people who are suffering from this, and the doctors just cannot find out what's going on.
Mm-hmm. And it can be a difficult situation too, because you can have when when you have infertility, it can be a situation where she's blaming him and he's blaming her, and it can be a really
Yeah.
bad situation.
Yeah, it's very difficult, and it's very easy for the couple to get into a marital crisis because it's just such a tremendous crushing cross. And the women and men tend to react differently to these kind of things, and then there can be a lot of misunderstanding going on. And but it's also a tremendous opportunity. It's a tremendous opportunity to grow through it. So ultimately, to say, I choose you, I accept you, I stay faithful to you with your infertility. When we get married, we say we accept each other with our fertility. We promise we're not going to use contraceptives, but we're going to welcome the children that God sends us. And here we're called to something different that we weren't expecting, like to say, I accept you now with us. And this is a tremendous validation of your love and of your marriage. And I don't know whether we want to get into this, but men want to fix things, tend to want to fix things.
Right. That's
And
natural.
it's natural, and it's very frustrating and hard for them to see their wives suffer and not be able to do anything. And so it's very important for the women to express to her husband that just him listening to her is so helpful. That is healing to her. And the man should understand that the woman needs to talk about this again and again, that it's, so helpful for her to have a shoulder to cry upon. And and then it's important for the woman to validate that in the man and say, look, I know this is hard for you, just listening to me and not being able to do anything, but you're really, really helping me. And so I think on both sides, you need to accept that the other is experiencing this differently, is going through this differently, that probably it's harder for the one than for the other. That's also normal. Doesn't mean that it's necessarily harder for the woman. I know couples where it's harder for the man. But again, it's important for the woman to validate the man and say, I know that you don't express it as much, but I know you're suffering tremendously. And, if you want to talk about it, then I'm here. And then again, the women can say to the men, please accompany me to my doctor's appointments, because it's so hard to be sitting alone in the waiting room. And it seems the only one who's suffering from infertility while all the other women are pregnant and heavily pregnant, and you're just waiting to hear some more bad news. And also to look at different options together, not just let the woman do all the research. So, yes, it's a tremendous cross. It can be really crushing. And if the marriage is suffering, I really recommend going to the priest or going to a therapist to help you get out of this and turn this thing around, because you may not have babies in the end, or I really help you do, but you can get out of this with a very strong marriage.
So, Marie, what is your advice for someone that's going through infertility?
Good question. I'd say there's sort of two levels at which I'd answer this. So the one is just practical advice, and the other is the more spiritual, personal advice. But let me start with a personal, spiritual one. First of all, I'd say it is normal that you are suffering tremendously. Now, let me clarify. So there are three groups of people. There are those for whom it's not very hard, and that's okay. And there are those for whom it's hard, but they can sort of move on more easily in life. And there are those for whom it's crushing. So, you're not at fault for either of the groups that you're in. You just work with whatever you have. But for those who find it really crushing, and I'm one of those, then I want to just affirm that it's normal to feel that way. And it's been suffering from infertility has been compared to losing a child. It's a reason to mourn. It's a reason for tremendous grief. You don't expect a couple who just lost their 3-year-old to sort of just skip and jump through life and do well. So you can't expect a couple suffering from this infertility to just be smiling and happy. Their heart is breaking, and so my main advice there would be allow yourself to mourn. It sounds so simple, and yet it's so difficult. Now, I found myself wanting to be courageous and heroic, and carry this with grace and courage. And that's, of course, nothing wrong with being courageous. But the problem is it becomes a problem when it's at the cost of mourning. Because since this is a real suffering, you have to grieve through this. You can't expect to cut corners. And, unconsciously, we don't even realize that, but unconsciously, then we're avoiding the cross by thinking, oh, we can just courageously barrel through this and be fine. So, no, we have to take the time to grieve, which means allowing yourself to be sad, allowing yourself to cry, realizing that this is going to take time, and therefore to be patient with yourself, and therefore also be gentle with yourself. It's normal that this pain comes up when you see other couples who have a lot of kids and are happy with their kids, and we may sort of chastise ourselves saying, oh, it's terrible, I'm feeling envy. Well, perhaps it's not envy, perhaps it's just grief that it's sort of showing itself because the other has what I don't have. And anyway, even if it is envy, I'm not going to get rid of the envy by simply saying to myself, this is wrong, and sort of pretend that I'm not envious. It simply means I have more grieving to do. And, and one easily feels sorry for oneself in this situation. Again, I say be gentle on yourself. It's normal. It again means you have more grieving to do and should carry it to our Lord, to help you, to heal you, and carry this cross with you. So I found it tremendously difficult to imagine, what is it going to be like for me in 5 years and 10 years and 20 years when I'm old and I still don't have any children? And that becomes unbearable because God gives me the grace for this moment. He doesn't give me yet the grace for what it's going to be like in 10, 20 years. And I have no idea what's going to be the case in 10 years. So perhaps I will have children of my own. Perhaps I will have adopted children. Perhaps I can deal with this completely differently. I just don't know. So the important thing is to just accept the present moment. I mean, we always hear that, and it's so simple. But for me to finally realize, this is all that is required of you for me from now is an incredible game changer. So just for this moment, I can accept this cross, not for tomorrow, not for in an hour, just for now. And somehow then it becomes easier. And so that would be just sort of in a nutshell my sort of personal advice. And on the practical level, it sounds so easy, but some couples have a really hard time dealing with that, is to find out what the medical problem is. Sometimes it's A, just too painful to do so, or B, you kind of think, well, God is in charge of my fertility, so I'm not gonna go to doctors. Well, no, God has given us doctors. He's given us science. When we suffer from some other illness, cancer, appendicitis, we don't say that God will take care of it. I mean, yes, of course we bring it to God as well, but we go to doctors because God wants us to find healing with all the wonderful means that He's given us in this world. And so it doesn't mean you have to try out everything. It doesn't mean you can't take breaks from this if it just gets too heavy and you feel like for a while you don't want to think about it. But I'd also say, think out of the box. Go to doctors like Dr. Hilgers, who's found wonderful methods to deal with infertility, and we'll talk about that later, I'm sure. And then, as I already mentioned, go to a good priest, a good Catholic therapist, or perhaps you have a friend who's particularly empathetic, on whose shoulder you can cry. Don't let this turn into depression, which it easily can. And so, again, don't feel guilty about that. If you just feel too crushed by this, there's no being too crushed. It's just being crushed, and then that means you need help.
In the book, you talk about secondary infertility. What is that?
So secondary infertility means you already have children, and for some reason you're suddenly having trouble having more. And that often hits couples as a surprise because you're not expecting that. When you've had 4 children, 5 children, why shouldn't you have more? And suddenly it's not happening. And that can be a tremendous suffering as well. And it's often hidden suffering because people think like, oh, well, they have a number of children, so, they're fine. But it's still a tremendous cross. And I was surprised, after we had our one child, I thought, well, I'm just going to be happy. And of course that was, I mean, it makes a tremendous difference having one child rather than no child. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's a complete game changer. But at the same time, I was surprised at the great longing I had of wanting more children. And each time I drive by the hospital where we'd had our baby, I was just yearning to go back there to have more. And so our journey was definitely not over. And then, of course, the miscarriage was a tremendous suffering as well. And then still for many years, we were hoping that more children will come. So I really feel with those couples who are going through that, and don't beat yourself up about suffering from it. It is a real cross.
Yeah, my wife and I experienced that personally, and it is a cross. It was very frustrating, more so for her than for me. She was keeping the charts and doing the temperature check, and we were using the Creighton method at the time, and it was very frustrating because she just kept doing it and nothing would happen. And finally she said, I'm not going to do this anymore. So it was a challenging time, and a lot of couples experience that.
Yeah, that's very true.
One of the things that couples go to is in vitro fertilization. And you talk about this quite a bit in the book. What are some of the misconceptions about the effectiveness of in vitro? And what is the process?
Yes. Great questions, Jeff. So first of all, people have the impression, well, if you go and have in vitro, then you will have a child. At the end, you will at least have one child in your arms. And unfortunately, that is not true. So it's become better. So now you have 36% chance after one cycle to have a child. But that means about two-thirds of those who haven't tried it are there without a child. And this is tremendously hard after everything that they've already been through. So first of all, the woman has to take these hormones to help her grow, have more eggs that they can harvest, and those hormones are very, very hard on the system. So she's already gone through years of infertility, is in a bad place emotionally, and then she has to take these hormones, which are just terrible. And then if things work out, then some embryos are put into the woman with the hope that they will implant, and then oftentimes they don't, which means they have miscarriages. So they're just flushed out, or along the way they can have more easily miscarriages. And all of that already with wanting a child so tremendously is really tough. And then the man, what he has to go through. So he has to masturbate, and often he's told to use porn for that. So how about that for being a sort of a great way to start a child, to start a family? That's terrible. And a lot of couples who've gone through for IVF who don't see any moral problems with it still speak about what a tremendous burden it was, how hard it was on them personally, on their marriage. And yes, they're happy to have children if they have children through it, but they're not sure they would do it again. So, it's not a walk in the park. It is definitely very, very hard. And it's a method that takes into account a very, very high death rate, which if it were about any other kind of medical method, we wouldn't allow this. So in 2018, there are about 80 million people in the world who've been conceived through IVF. And that means that about 72 million died in the process. So if you count, about 9 to 10% survival rate per embryo, and with a method that not so long ago had, a much significantly less high success rate than it has now. But, even with a 36% rate of cycle, well, that's not counting the children that have been flushed out, that have been frozen to keep for later, and are most likely forgotten, because that's what often happens. We have all of these frozen embryos all over the world, and nobody knows what's going to happen to them, or those that have just been discarded from the beginning by the doctors because they feel that don't have as high a survival rate, or they don't look as healthy. And what a way, again, to conceive a child. And it was interesting for me to read the witnesses of adults who were conceived through IVF and say how painful it is for them, the thought that they were conceived in a lab by technicians who decided who's going to live and who's not going to live. And so no wonder some of these children are traumatized. Some of them go through a survival syndrome. So this kind of survival guilt. Why was I chosen and not my siblings? And I need to prove myself, therefore, to somehow be worthy, which is a tremendous burden to put on children. Or others then react with saying, well, I can't prove myself anyway, so I might as well just drop it all and sort of go another route. Let me make clear, Jeff, though, that there haven't been so many studies out there as should have happened until now, simply because the industry is very happy with the way this is going, and there's no reason really to look into that. But some have been done, and so if you look at those and look at the witnesses of people, of either couples who've gone through this or their children who are now adults, then it's very interesting what you see. And for example, let me tell you another quote that I found very striking. So one woman said, my mother put the burden of her suffering of not having children onto me. So now I'm carrying it. And I think it's even worse than that, because we know, you and I know, that infertility is a tremendous cross. It's a tremendous tragedy, awful pain for the couple. And then what we put on our children that are conceived through IVF is even worse than just that tragedy, which is bad enough. Because what I'm doing with my child, and which is the reason why the church is against IVF, is that it's going against the dignity of the child, and not just the child, also of the spouses. And the child that always should be received as a gift becomes a commodity. And you can just see that. I mean, it's so utilitarian, so cold, so technical to be conceived in a lab in such an unsafe situation, sort of being nestled in the womb of the mother of these children are at the mercy of these technicians who decide what to do with them. Um, and so we're making use of these children to fill that hole in our hearts. And so that's making use of another person, which never should be the case. The other, because of his or her infinite value and dignity, should always be respected and loved as an end in of itself, and never ever used as a means. And that is unfortunately what happens in IVF. Now, don't get me wrong, parents who've conceived children that way, they can be fantastic parents otherwise. There's no doubt
Hmm.
about it. They've wanted these children. But it doesn't change the fact that at the moment of their conception, something happened that was a serious injustice against these children, even though they were given existence. And of course, the church and the whole world, hopefully we all love them just as much for being conceived that way than otherwise. But it's precisely because of their great dignity and because they should always be loved in the right way that the church is against IVF. So I know that's a tremendously hard message to hear for people who think that IVF is their only way to have a child. But think of it this way. IVF does not heal you from your medical condition, preventing you from having children. It is sidelining you and is producing children for you. What you really want, I think, what every couple suffering from infertility would really want is just to be healed from it and having it the natural way. And that is where people like Dr. Hilgers at the Pope Paul VI Institute in Omaha, Nebraska, where you live, Jeff,
Right.
has done such a tremendous job, because what he does, attempts to do, is healing people. And he has a much higher success rate than IVF.
Hmm.
So, it doesn't go against the dignity of the person. It's easier on the system. I'm not saying it's a walk in the park either. It's still difficult. Anything medical can involve surgery and hard things that are a bit harder. But you don't feel like you're being used. Your child isn't being used. You are respected. Your children are respected. And then, if all goes well, you are able to have children on your own, and again with a much higher success rate than IVF. And it's not just Dr. Hilgers, he's trained doctors all over the US and the world who are doing this. So you don't even have to do the hike there if you can't or if you don't want to.
A much better place to hike in the summer than it is into the winter.
Yeah.
But you're right. He has trained people all over the world.
Mhm.
And there are other places that provide those same type of treatments.
Mhm.
I find it fascinating that so many people, Marie, don't understand how much better it is for the woman, number one, number two, for the child, but number three, that it is um, so more effective to use something like Dr. Hilgers and his methods than to use IVF. The one thing that I have found in talking to people, though, and you can speak to this, is they tell me, well, we just didn't want to, they told us it was going to take this long to potentially have a baby. Whereas if we do IVF, it's only going to take a shorter amount of time.
Ah, okay. Well, it's hard. And also, I mean, the whole culture is sort of geared towards IVF. That's what couples hear from their doctors. Just do IVF, and in all likelihood, you'll have a child. And because it's a multi-million industry, I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
think these doctors are earning a lot of money by pushing that, and they probably don't know about anything much better. Um, so yeah, it's sad if you go that route. I'd say, seriously consider doing another and read the teachings of the church on this, because so often we wrongly perceive the church as putting burdens on us, as just making life harder, but in reality God, who's speaking through the church, wants to show us the path of life, that which is in accordance with our dignity. What God wants us to learn is to learn again the language of love, which we only speak in a very fumbling way since the fall, which we have to learn again. And wanting to use another is typical, not respecting boundaries, manipulating, lying. All of these, they're in that category of using the other, and unfortunately, IVF is also a way of using the other. So, well, yes, perhaps it's going to take longer, perhaps it's going to ask for a little bit more, but isn't it a great thing to be able to go through pregnancy the normal way? Um, I mean, you can never force people to accept that, but you can just hope, and hopefully my book will make a difference as well.
Well, the book is a great resource. There's a lot of excellent information. And in fact, you have some resources in the back of the book that are very good.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I, there are various things to which people can turn associations. So the one is, of course, the Pope Paul VI Institute, Dr. Hildreth, if they want some medical help. Then there's Hannah's Tears, which helps couples who've gone through infertility, miscarriage, death of a child in any form. And there's one group that I didn't mention in the back of my book. It's called Springs in the Desert, which does the same and helps women along. And it's very beautiful what they're doing, the kind of retreats they offer. And then if you have a bioethical question, there's the NCBC, the National Catholic Bioethics Center, where you can call day and night to get the advice of a good Catholic bioethicist and help you to figure out what methods are okay and which aren't. Yeah.
What else would you like to share with the regular Catholic Guy listeners out there, Marie?
So I don't know whether we covered what to tell, how to help friends and family about what to say,
Right.
because they often feel so lost. And it is a difficult place to be in. So you have my sympathy out there, but keep it simple. So on the one hand, don't bring up the topic, even if you're close. At most, what you can do is say, look, if you want to talk about this, I'm here for you. I just want to let you know. But, not push yourself and then not address it again yourself. And then if the couple, or if one of the spouses wants to talk to you about it, then don't feel like the burden is on you to fix the problem, because in all likelihood, you can't. So it is tremendous what you can do by listening with sympathy. And that's where compassion comes into play. So your compassion comes from the word pati in Latin. So to suffer, and to come means to suffer with. So, if somebody's hanging on the cross, then often all you can do is stand underneath, like the Blessed Mother and St. John, and be there. And, it may not seem like much, but it is tremendous. And by listening with true compassion and just saying simple things like, I am so sorry that you're going through this, with real love, the warmth of love, then you're actually helping the couple to heal. And so again, you're not going to be able to fix the problem. You're going to be able to lighten the weight for a little while, which is already a lot. And if the spouses come back to you, then that's great, and be there for them. And if they don't, that's fine too. Don't push yourself. It's so often, I think we all have this sense after people have been suffering for a while that somehow they're responsible. They must be doing something wrong because they should be at a different spot at this moment. But this is what Job's friends in the Old Testament get wrong. After a while, they start blaming him. God must be punishing him for something that he did. It's a very human thing to do, and it's wrong. God does not validate their approach, and it's not for us to decide at what point a couple should be in a better spot. Each person has their own journey, and we're not helping them by sort of putting pressure on them and telling them, well, really, you should do something somewhere different. It actually means we're not there to share with them the cross, because it gets heavy for us too. Just standing there, we're sharing at that cross. It's making it difficult. So what we too have to do is hold out with them and be there for them. So so my last sort of words of wisdom, if any, would be, carry on. Both the family and the couple undergoing this. This can become a journey of hope. It may seem like you're not seeing the end of the tunnel, but by grieving and by giving this to Christ, truly healing is taking place, and you will find yourself in another spot. Doesn't mean necessarily that the pain will go completely away, but it will change. And I loved to read about Mother Teresa's spirituality and the way she speaks about our inner Calcuttas that we have to bring to Christ. Often, those parts of us that seem so dark and terrible and painful that we don't want to open them to anyone, not even Christ, are precisely the ones that God is yearning for and wants to enter in order to heal us. And He is the only one who can heal us in that depth. So, at the moment, it may seem like you're doing a terrible job with this cross and this burden. That is part of the journey. That's normal to feel that way. You are walking in darkness at the moment, but my prediction is that in all likelihood, you will hit the end of the tunnel, and that things will get easier, and that you will experience a different kind of fruitfulness, even though it will take the next life to say what tremendously great things God has worked in you and in others through this cross.
Mm-hmm. It certainly is a challenge.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Marie, thank you for being on the show. What's the best place to get your book?
Well, you can go directly to Emmaus Road that brought out the
Mm-hmm.
book. So that's what I recommend. It's obviously on these other in these other places like Amazon, which I don't like to promote. But yeah, so it's not a problem. It's very easy to get it to Emmaus Road.
And we'll put a link in the show notes to Emmaus Road to be able to get Marie's book.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Marie.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeff. It's been a
God
pleasure.
bless.
God bless.